The invisible thief? The mystery of 30% power loss. You know the feeling. You're merging onto the highway, your foot presses the accelerator, and you wait. There's a pause, a hesitation, where power should be. The engine groans instead of roars. The seats don't push back against you the way they once did. Your car isn't broken, not exactly. It starts every morning. It gets you to work. But somewhere between the day you drove it off the lot and today, something was stolen from you. Something you never saw leave. The thief you'll never catch in the act. Here's the uncomfortable truth most drivers never learn. Your engine is almost certainly not producing the power it was designed to deliver. For many vehicles on the road today, especially those with 50,000 miles or more on the odometer, the engine is operating at roughly 70% of its original capability. Not because anything is wrong in the way a check engine light would tell you, but because of a thief so subtle, so patient, it works in layers thinner than a human hair. Carbon buildup. Every time your engine burns fuel, it leaves behind a microscopic residue, a fine, sticky film of carbon deposits. Alone, each layer is nothing, invisible, insignificant. But mile after mile, month after month, these layers accumulate. They coat the tips of your fuel injectors, narrowing the precision-engineered spray pattern that's supposed to atomize fuel into a fine mist. They crust over your intake valves, disrupting the smooth flow of air into the combustion chamber. They cake onto the chamber walls themselves, creating hot spots that throw off your engine's carefully calibrated timing. The result? Your engine doesn't combust fuel the way its engineers intended. It's like trying to breathe through a straw that gets narrower every year. You adapt. You forget what full lungs felt like. An old problem with a long history. This isn't a modern problem. It's as old as the internal combustion engine itself. When Carl Benz unveiled his patent motor wagon in 1885, the machine widely regarded as the first true automobile, his mechanics discovered something troubling within the first few hundred hours of operation. The engine lost power. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. When they disassembled it, they found the culprit, a hard, black crust of carbon lining the inside of the combustion chamber. They scraped it out by hand with metal tools. The power returned. And then, a few hundred hours later, they scraped it out again. It was the engine's first recurring disease, and in over 140 years of automotive engineering, we've never fully cured it. We've managed it, engineered around it, and developed sophisticated fuel injection systems to minimize it. But carbon still builds up. It always does. The $800 question. Take your car to a dealership or a well-equipped mechanic today and describe the symptoms: sluggish acceleration, rough idling, a subtle loss of the punch your car used to have, and you'll likely hear a familiar diagnosis. You need a fuel system cleaning, maybe a walnut blasting for the intake valves. Could be time for a full carbon service. The quote? Anywhere from $400 to $800, sometimes more for direct injection engines, where the problem tends to be worst. It's real work, and when done properly, it's effective. But here's what makes this story interesting. What turns a routine maintenance tale into something worth paying attention to? There is a solution that costs roughly $2. It's not exotic. It's not new. It's not sold in an auto parts store with a flashy label and bold claims. In fact, there's a decent chance it's already sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, doing absolutely nothing. It works on the same chemical principle that professional cleaning services use, just without the labor markup, the shop hourly rate, and the waiting room coffee. But before we get to what it is and how it works, you need to understand why it works, because the science behind carbon removal is what separates a real solution from snake oil. And that's exactly where we're headed next. The $8 billion conspiracy. Why mechanics hate this hack. Now that you understand what carbon buildup does to your engine, how it quietly steals power, efficiency, and responsiveness mile by mile, the logical next question is simple. Why hasn't someone solved this cheaply? The answer isn't that no one has. The answer is that solving it cheaply is bad for business. Follow the money. The global automotive fuel additives market is worth approximately $18.4 billion. Let that number settle in for a moment. $18.4 billion? Not for engine parts, not for tires, not for anything that physically moves your car down the road. For chemicals, you pour into your fuel tank. This is an industry built on a single elegant premise. Your engine gets dirty, and you need to keep buying products to clean it. Seafoam, Techron, Lucas, Royal Purple, BG, 44K. The brands are everywhere, lined up on auto parts, store shelves and bottles designed to look scientific and authoritative, priced between $12 and $35, with instructions that recommend use every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Do the math on that. If you're a loyal customer using a $25 bottle every oil change, twice a year, for the average 12-year lifespan of a vehicle, you'll spend around $600 on fuel additives alone. Multiply that by the roughly 290 million registered vehicles in the United States, and you begin to see the architecture of a revenue machine. that makes enormous amounts of money solving a problem, just enough to ensure you come back and solve it again next quarter. This isn't about whether these products work. Many of them do, partially, temporarily. That's the point. A product that completely solved carbon buildup with a single application would be a commercial disaster. The fix that was never hidden, just never promoted. Here's what the additive industry doesn't want framed as a headline. The kitchen cabinet solution wasn't suppressed because it's dangerous. It wasn't buried because it doesn't work. It was simply never promoted because it works too well, costs too little, and you only need to use it a handful of times. There's no patent to protect, no proprietary formula to license, no recurring revenue model to build a quarterly earnings call around. A solution that costs roughly $2 per treatment and addresses carbon buildup at the molecular level is, from a business perspective, not an opportunity. It's a threat. No company is going to spend millions in advertising to tell you about something you can buy in the baking aisle. And so the knowledge exists. It's in chemistry textbooks and engineering papers in the quiet corners of automotive forums where experienced mechanics share what actually works. But it never reaches the mainstream consumer, not because it's fringe science, because there's no profit motive to push it there. The publications that look the other way. You might wonder, where are the journalists? Where are the consumer advocates? If a $2 kitchen product can do what a $30 branded bottle does, why hasn't a major automotive publication run that story? The answer is on their own pages. Open any mainstream car magazine or website, digital or print, and count the advertisements. Fuel additive brands are among the most consistent, high-spending advertisers in automotive media. They buy full-page spreads. They sponsor video series. They fund the product review sections that blur the line between editorial content and paid promotion. A publication that depends on Chevron's Techron advertising budget is not going to run a feature titled, "Why You Don't Need Techron." It's not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. There's no secret meeting, no buried documents. It's simpler and more effective than that. It's the quiet, structural bias of an industry where the people who pay for the platform also sell the product. Editorial independence bends around revenue the way light bends around gravity, invisibly, but completely. The result is a media landscape where the $30 solution gets reviewed, recommended, and ranked in top 10 fuel additives listicles, while the $2 solution sits in your pantry, unmentioned. The chemical mirror they hope you never look into now. Here's where the story turns from suspicion into science, because this isn't about feelings or hunches. It's about molecular chemistry. The Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE International, is one of the most respected technical bodies in the world. Their published papers are the engineering bedrock that car manufacturers, fuel companies, and additive formulators all rely on. And buried in those papers is a detail that reframes the entire fuel additive industry. The primary mechanism by which most carbon-cleaning additives work is acid-based dissolution. Specifically, they use organic acids, weak acids derived from carbon-based molecules, to break the chemical bonds holding carbon deposits together. The carbon doesn't get blasted away. It doesn't get burned off by some proprietary miracle compound. It gets dissolved chemically by an organic acid reacting with the deposit structure at the molecular level. Now look at the ingredient list on your kitchen cabinet solution. You'll find the same class of compound, the same type of organic acid, the same dissolution mechanism. The expensive branded bottles have added detergents, surfactants, carrier solvents, and proprietary blends that optimize delivery through a fuel system. That's real chemistry, and it has value. But the core active mechanism, the thing that actually breaks carbon loose from metal, it's the same reaction, the same molecular handshake. The branded products are a luxury delivery system for a chemical process your kitchen pantry can initiate for pennies. So what is it? By now, you've earned the answer. You understand the problem, carbon buildup silently choking your engine's potential. You understand the industry, billions of dollars flowing through a system designed to sell you the cure in recurring doses. And you understand the chemistry, organic acid dissolution as the universal mechanism behind carbon removal. In part 3, we'll name the product, explain exactly how it works at the molecular level, and walk through the precise method for using it safely and effectively. Because knowing what it is matters far less than knowing why it works and how to apply it correctly. The difference between a hack and a solution is understanding. The Smithsonian secret, ancient wisdom and military proof. We've established the problem, carbon buildup stealing your engine's power. We followed the money, an $18.4 billion industry built on selling you the cure in quarterly doses. Now it's time to follow the timeline. Because the solution we're circling isn't some internet age life hack dreamed up in a YouTube garage. It's one of the oldest chemical applications in human history. And the proof of its effectiveness doesn't come from bloggers or forum posts. It comes from the Smithsonian Institution, from the United States military, from NASA. This is the part of the story where you stop wondering if it works and start wondering why you were never told. 5,000 years before your first oil change. Long before the internal combustion engine existed, carbon buildup was already a problem, and humans were already solving it. Around 3000 BC, in the river-fed cities of ancient Mesopotamia, Sumerian metalworkers operated some of the earliest known furnaces. These craftsmen smelted copper, bronze, and eventually iron at temperatures high enough to leave thick layers of carbon residue on their furnace walls and crucibles. The buildup reduced heat efficiency, contaminated their metals, and shortened the life of equipment that took weeks to construct. Their solution was remarkably sophisticated for an era that predated written chemistry by millennia. They used fermented date and barley liquids, what we would recognize today as early forms of vinegar, to soak and dissolve the carbon deposits. The acetic acid produced by fermentation reacted with the hardened carbon, softening and breaking it down in a way that mechanical scraping alone could not achieve. They didn't know the word acid. They didn't understand molecular bonds, but they understood cause and effect. Soak the blackened walls in sour wine, and the carbon comes loose. This wasn't a one civilization discovery. The knowledge traveled and resurfaced independently across the ancient world. Roman engineers, maintaining the bronze and iron components of their aqueduct systems and military equipment, documented the use of acetum, Latin for vinegar, as a cleaning agent for metal surfaces fouled by combustion residue. Their metallurgists understood that heated vinegar worked faster than cold, an empirical observation that aligns perfectly with modern reaction kinetics. Heat accelerates the rate at which acetic acid breaks carbon bonds. Thousands of miles east and centuries later, engineers during China's Tang dynasty faced a version of the same problem on a larger and more dangerous scale. Early gunpowder weapons, fire lances, and primitive cannons accumulated heavy carbon fouling after repeated firing. The residue degraded accuracy, created dangerous pressure inconsistencies, and eventually rendered the weapons unusable. Military records from the period describe the use of rice vinegar solutions to clean cannon barrels, restoring them to functional condition without the damage that abrasive scraping inflicted on the metal. 3 civilizations, 3 millennia apart, 3 independent arrivals at the same chemical truth. Acetic acid dissolves carbon deposits from metal surfaces. This wasn't folk wisdom, it was empirical chemistry, repeated and validated across the entire span of human engineering, long before anyone had a word for what was happening at the molecular level. The Kettering discovery, 1914. Fast forward to Dayton, Ohio. The year is 1914, and Charles F. Kettering, one of the most prolific inventors in American automotive history, is running experiments at Delco, the company he co-founded to develop electrical systems for automobiles. Kettering was not a man who accepted conventional thinking. He had already invented the electric starter motor, eliminating the dangerous hand crank that broke arms and kept many people from driving. Now he was turning his attention to a problem that every early motorist knew intimately. Engines lost power over time, and no one had a cost-effective solution. The prevailing approach was mechanical. You disassembled the engine, scraped the carbon out by hand, a labor-intensive process that took a skilled mechanic the better part of a day, and reassembled everything. It worked, but it was expensive, time-consuming, and hard on the engine components themselves. Kettering believed chemistry could do what wrenches couldn't. His team began systematic testing of various chemical compounds, looking for substances that could dissolve carbon deposits without corroding engine metals. They tested alkaline solutions, petroleum-based solvents, and a range of acidic compounds. The results pointed clearly in one direction. Acetic acid, the primary active compound in ordinary household vinegar, dissolved carbon deposits effectively at concentrations and temperatures compatible with engine operation. In controlled dynamometer testing, engines treated with acetic acid solutions recovered measurable power output. Kettering's records document a restoration of approximately 22% of lost engine performance in test engines that had accumulated significant carbon fouling, a figure that brought them back to near original factory specifications. The implications were significant. Here was a compound that was cheap, widely available, non-toxic in dilute form, and effective against the single most common cause of engine performance degradation. Kettering documented his findings meticulously, as was his habit. Those records, lab notebooks, dynamometer data, and correspondence detailing the experiments, eventually found their way into the archives of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History, where they remain as part of the Kettering collection. 22%, from a substance that cost almost nothing, applied with no special equipment, validated by one of the greatest engineering minds of the 20th century, and filed away in a museum where almost no one would ever think to look, when the military needed it to work. There's a difference between a laboratory finding and a field-proven solution. The gap between this works on a test bench and this works when lives depend on it is where most ideas go to die. Acetic acid chemistry didn't die in that gap. It was promoted through it by the United States military. The B-17 problem, 1943. By 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces had a crisis that didn't involve enemy fighters or flak batteries. It involved carbon. The Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines powering the B-17 Flying Fortress were magnificent pieces of engineering. 9-cylinder radial engines producing over 1,200 horsepower each. But they were being pushed to their operational limits. Missions over occupied Europe demanded maximum power for high-altitude flight, extended range, and the ability to maintain formation even with damaged engines. Carbon buildup in these engines wasn't an inconvenience. It was a mission-critical threat. Fouled engines produced less power at altitude. Less power meant slower speeds, lower service ceilings, and bombers that couldn't keep up with their formation, turning them into isolated targets. Engine failures, caused by carbon-related detonation events, could bring down an aircraft and its 10-man crew. The standard maintenance protocol, full engine teardown and manual carbon removal, took each bomber out of service for days. With attrition rates already stretching the 8th Air Force thin, the military needed a faster solution. Army Air Force's maintenance engineers conducted a systematic study of chemical cleaning agents that could be introduced into running engines to dissolve carbon deposits in the field, without disassembly. Among the compounds tested, dilute acetic acid solutions, applied through the carburetor intake while the engine ran at controlled RPMs, demonstrated effective carbon removal with no measurable damage to engine components. The treatment could be performed in hours rather than days. It didn't require pulling the engine from the aircraft, and it worked consistently enough that it was incorporated into field maintenance protocols for units operating under high-tempo combat conditions, where every aircraft and every hour mattered. The study results were classified as routine technical maintenance data, not secret, but not widely distributed outside military channels. They lived in the archives of what would become the Air Force Historical Research Agency, read primarily by military historians and maintenance engineers, invisible to the consumer automotive world. NASA's quiet confirmation, 2001. Nearly 6 decades later, the same chemistry surfaced again, this time in the maintenance records of the most advanced machines ever built. In 2001, NASA maintenance documentation for the Space Shuttle program included references to dilute organic acid solutions, including acetic acid used in cleaning protocols for engine and auxiliary power unit components. The context was different from a B-17 engine or a Model T, but the underlying problem was identical. Combustion produces carbon residue. Carbon residue degrades performance, and organic acids dissolve carbon residue from metal surfaces without damaging the base material. These weren't experimental applications. They were established maintenance procedures, documented in the methodical, redundancy-obsessed language of NASA engineering, an organization that doesn't include a chemical in its maintenance protocols unless it has been tested, validated, and proven safe for components worth more than most people's houses. The shuttle maintenance records were declassified and made available through NASA's Technical Reports server. They sit there today, publicly accessible, confirming that the same basic chemistry Sumerian metalworkers stumbled onto 5,000 years ago was still being used to maintain spacecraft at the turn of the 21st century. The thread that runs through everything. Stand back far enough, and the pattern is undeniable. A Sumerian furnace, a Roman aqueduct fitting, a Tang Dynasty cannon barrel, a Delco test engine in 1914, a B-17 bomber over Germany, a space shuttle in a Florida hangar. Different centuries, different civilizations, different machines, the same chemistry, the same molecule, acetic acid, CH3CO, doing the same work, breaking carbon free from metal. The question was never whether it works. That question was answered before the fall of Rome and re-answered every century since. The question is how to apply it correctly, with the right concentration, the right method, and the right understanding of what's happening inside your engine. That's part 4, the science of why this molecule does what it does, and the precise, step-by-step method for using it safely in a modern engine. No guesswork, no folklore, just chemistry. The kitchen chemistry, how to perform the $2 Hack 3 parts. 5,000 years of history, an $18.4 billion industry. Military validation, NASA confirmation, Smithsonian archives, all of it pointing to a single molecule. It's time to name it, the active ingredient. Walk into your kitchen. Open the cabinet where you keep cooking supplies. Look for the clear plastic jug you probably bought for less than $2 and have barely touched since. The one you might use to dye Easter eggs or clean a coffee maker once a year. White distilled vinegar, 5% acetic acid. That's it. That's the substance Sumerian metalworkers discovered empirically in 3000 BC. The compound Charles Kettering tested on dynamometers in 1914. The chemistry the Army Air Forces used to keep B-17s flying over occupied Europe. The cleaning agent NASA included in space shuttle maintenance protocols. Not a proprietary blend, not a patented formula, not a product with a racing stripe on the bottle and a promise on the label. A commodity so cheap, so ordinary, so universally available that no company on earth can build a premium brand around it. A gallon costs between $1.50 and $3 at virtually any grocery store in any country on the planet. A single engine treatment requires a fraction of that. The math works out to roughly $2, sometimes less, for a chemical treatment that operates on the same molecular principle as products, costing 15 to 30 times more. Now let's understand why it works, not as folklore, as chemistry. The molecular war inside your engine. Carbon deposits in your engine aren't loose soot sitting on a surface like dust on a shelf. They're chemically bonded to the metal substrate, layered structures of polymerized hydrocarbons that have been baked onto surfaces at temperatures exceeding 400 to 190 degrees again and again until they form a hard, varnish-like shell. This is why you can't just blow them out with high RPMs or dissolve them with ordinary gasoline. The deposits are, at the molecular level, gripping the metal. Acetic acid, CH3SOH, wages a quiet, precise war against this structure. When acetic acid contacts a carbon deposit, it initiates a process called acid-catalyzed hydrolysis. The acetic acid molecule donates a hydrogen ion, H+, to the oxygen-containing functional groups within the carbon deposit's polymerized structure. These functional groups, carbonyls, ethers, hydroxyl bridges, are the chemical rivets holding the deposit together and anchoring it to the metal surface. When the hydrogen ion attacks these bonds, it weakens and ultimately breaks them. The large, insoluble carbon polymer begins to fragment into smaller molecules. These fragments are polar. They carry an electrical charge, asymmetry, which makes them soluble in water. What was once a rock-hard deposit cemented to your intake valve becomes a collection of small, water-soluble organic compounds that can be carried away by the engine's normal fluid dynamics, exhaust gases, fuel flow, and oil circulation. The reaction is not violent. It doesn't corrode aluminum, cast iron, or steel at the dilute concentrations found in household vinegar. The 5% acetic acid solution is weak enough to leave engine metals unharmed. Their oxide layers provide natural protection, but strong enough to systematically dismantle the carbon structures built up on their surfaces. This is precisely how the premium fuel additives work. Their active cleaning mechanisms rely on organic acid chemistry, sometimes acetic acid itself, sometimes citric or formic acid derivatives, always the same class of reaction. The branded products add carrier solvents to improve distribution, detergent surfactants to help lift loosened deposits, and corrosion inhibitors as an extra safety margin. These are legitimate refinements, but they're refinements of a base process that a $2 jug of vinegar performs on its own. Think of it this way. The expensive product is a guided missile. Vinegar is a hand grenade. The missile is more precise, but they both destroy the same target. Method 1. The vacuum line method, the pro way. This is the more targeted approach, faster, more dramatic in its results, and the method closest to what professional fuel system cleaning services actually do with their equipment. It introduces acetic acid directly into the intake manifold, where it contacts the intake valves and combustion chambers in vapor and liquid form. What you need: white distilled vinegar, 5% acetic acid, approximately 16 Oz, a small container, a clean jar or measuring cup, a length of small diameter vacuum hose, 3x16 or 1x4 inner diameter, available at any auto parts store for a few dollars, or use the existing hose. Basic familiarity with your engine bay. The process. Step 1. Warm the engine. Start your car and let it reach normal operating temperature. This typically takes 5 to 10 minutes of idle running. A warm engine is essential. The heat accelerates the acid-carbon reaction dramatically and ensures the vinegar vaporizes on contact with hot surfaces rather than pooling as liquid. Step 2. Locate the brake booster vacuum line. This is a rubber hose, typically 3/8 to 1.2 in diameter, running from the intake manifold to the brake booster, a large round canister on the driver's side firewall. It provides a direct, accessible entry point into the intake manifold's vacuum. On most vehicles, it's easy to identify and reach without removing any covers. Step 3. Disconnect the vacuum line at the intake manifold side. Pull the hose off the manifold fitting. You'll hear a slight hiss. That's the engine's intake vacuum, and it's what will draw the vinegar into the engine. The engine may idle roughly with this line disconnected. That's normal. Step 4. Feed the vinegar slowly. With the engine idling, dip the disconnected end of the vacuum line, or an attached smaller hose, into your container of vinegar. The engine's vacuum will begin drawing vinegar into the intake manifold. The critical rule: go slowly. Introduce approximately 1 ounce every 15 to 20 seconds. You want a controlled metered feed, not a flood. The engine's idle may dip and stumble slightly as it ingests the liquid. This is expected. If the engine begins to stall, pull the hose out of the vinegar for a few seconds to let it recover, then continue. Step 5. Use approximately 12 to 16 ounces total. Feed the full amount at the controlled rate. The entire process takes roughly 5 to 8 minutes. You may notice white vapor from the exhaust during this process. This is normal and indicates the acid is reacting with deposits and the byproducts are exiting through the exhaust system. Step 6. Reconnect the vacuum line. Once you've fed the full amount, reattach the hose to the manifold fitting. Push it on firmly until it seats. Step 7. Rev and drive. With the hose reconnected, rev the engine to 25-100 at 3,000 RPM several times while parked. Then take the car for a 15 to 20 minute drive at varying speeds. Highway driving is ideal. This clears loosened deposits through the exhaust and allows the engine's normal operating cycle to flush the system. What to expect? Improvements in throttle response and idle smoothness are often noticeable within the first drive. Engines with heavy carbon buildup, particularly direct injection engines, may benefit from a second treatment after 500 miles. Method 2. The fuel tank method, the easy way. This is the simpler approach, less immediate in its impact but remarkably effective over time, particularly for cleaning fuel injectors and maintaining the entire fuel delivery pathway. It's the method for people who want results without opening the hood. What you need: white distilled vinegar, 5% acetic acid, 2 cups, 16 Oz, a fuel tank that's approximately 1/4 full. The process: Step 1. Wait for a quarter tank. Drive your car until the fuel gauge reads approximately 1/4 full. This is important. You want enough fuel to dilute the vinegar to safe concentrations, but not so much that the acid becomes too dilute to be effective. Step 2. Add 2 cups of vinegar directly to the fuel tank. Remove the fuel cap and pour 16 ounces of white distilled vinegar into the tank. No funnel required, though one keeps things cleaner. Step 3. Fill the tank with gasoline. Immediately drive to a gas station and fill the tank completely. The fuel will mix with the vinegar during the filling process and through normal driving agitation. The resulting concentration is extremely dilute, roughly 0.1% to 0.15% acetic acid by volume, but this is sufficient to act on the carbon deposits coating your fuel injectors over the course of a full tank. Step 4. Drive normally. No special driving behavior required. As the fuel-vinegar mixture flows through your fuel system, the acetic acid makes contact with the carbon deposits on injector tips, and, in port injection engines, the intake valve faces. The slow, continuous exposure over the course of a full tank allows the acid to work gradually, dissolving deposits layer by layer. Step 5. Repeat once per quarter. Optional maintenance. For ongoing maintenance, repeating this treatment every 3 to 4 months, roughly every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, keeps injectors clean and prevents the heavy accumulation cycle from starting over. What to expect? The fuel tank method is a slow burn. You won't feel a dramatic difference after the first 20 minutes of driving, but by the time you've run through the full tank, many drivers report smoother idle, improved fuel economy, typically 2 to 5% improvement on heavily fouled engines, and crisper throttle response. The effect is cumulative. 2 or 3 treatments over consecutive tanks can produce results comparable to a single vacuum line treatment. A note on what this won't do. Honesty matters more than hype. Vinegar is effective chemistry, but it's not magic, and setting realistic expectations is what separates a useful technique from disappointment. This treatment works on carbon deposits, the soft to medium buildup that accumulates on fuel injectors, intake valves, and combustion chamber surfaces during normal operation. It will not fix mechanical problems: worn piston rings, damaged valve seals, timing chain stretch, or compression loss from physical wear. If your engine has 250,000 miles and burns a quart of oil every 1,000 miles, carbon cleaning will not reverse the underlying mechanical wear. It also won't produce miracles on brand new engines with minimal buildup. If your car has 10,000 miles on it, there's not enough carbon to remove for you to notice a difference. The sweet spot, where this treatment produces the most noticeable results, is engines with 40,000 to 150,000 miles, particularly direct injection engines, which are especially prone to intake valve carbon accumulation because fuel never washes over the valves. Now you have the what and the how. In Part 5, we'll cover the results, real data on what to expect, how to measure the difference, and the long-term maintenance protocol that keeps your engine running at full power for the life of the vehicle. The 5.2 MPG transformation, the Albuquerque case study. Theory is comfortable, history is impressive, chemistry is convincing, but nothing settles an argument like a man with a notebook, a gas pump, and absolutely nothing to sell you. The mechanic, who tested it on himself. His name doesn't matter for this story. He asked that it not be used, and we'll respect that. What matters is what he was, a retired ASE certified mechanic living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with 34 years of professional experience, turning wrenches at dealerships and independent shops. A man who had performed hundreds of fuel system cleanings over his career using every branded product and professional grade system on the market. A man who knew engines the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not from textbooks, but from having his hands inside them every working day of his adult life. What also matters is what he drove. a 2007 Toyota Camry with the 2.4-liter 2AZ FE 4-cylinder engine. The car had 142,000 miles on the odometer. It ran fine. No check engine light, no obvious problems. Just the quiet, creeping symptoms that any experienced mechanic recognizes immediately in someone else's car, but tends to ignore in his own. A slight hesitation off the line, an idle that wasn't quite as glass smooth as it once was, fuel economy that had drifted downward so gradually he'd stopped noticing. He noticed when gas prices climbed past $4.50 a gallon in the summer and he started tracking his fill-ups. The numbers were consistent and consistently disappointing. 23.8 to 24.3 miles per gallon, tank after tank. The Camry's EPA rating for highway driving was 33 MPG. Even accounting for age, mileage, and real-world driving conditions, he knew the car should be doing better. His mechanic's instinct pointed to one place: carbon buildup on the intake valves and injectors. He pulled up the estimate for a professional cleaning at a local shop, a shop he'd worked at, run by people he trusted. The quote, $450 for a full fuel system service, including injector cleaning and intake valve carbon removal, $450 for his own car, for a service he'd performed on other people's vehicles more times than he could count. He laughed. Then he walked into his kitchen. The experiment. Being a mechanic, and a stubborn one, he didn't just pour vinegar into his tank and hope. He designed a test. Not a laboratory study, but something rigorous enough to satisfy a man who'd spent 3 decades diagnosing problems by the numbers. The baseline. He filled his tank completely at a single gas station, reset his trip odometer, and drove his normal routes, a mix of city streets and the I-25, I-40 corridors around Albuquerque, until the tank was nearly empty. He filled up at the same pump, recorded the gallons, and calculated his mileage. He did this for 3 consecutive tanks to establish a reliable baseline, the average 24.1 MPG, consistent with what he'd been seeing for months. The treatment. On the 4th tank, with the gauge reading just under a quarter, he added 2 cups of white distilled vinegar, store brand, $1.40 for the jug, directly into the fuel tank, then filled up with regular 87-octane gasoline from his usual station. He drove normally. Same routes, same habits, same lead foot on the on-ramp to I-40 that he'd never admit to. The first treated tank, 26.4 MPG, an improvement of 2.3 miles per gallon over his baseline. Noticeable, but he wasn't ready to draw conclusions from a single data point. Conditions vary. Temperature matters, wind matters, the number of times you get stuck behind a semi on Paseo del Norte matters. The second treated tank. He repeated the process. 2 cups of vinegar, quarter tank, fill up, drive normally. This time, 28.1 MPG. Another jump. Throttle response felt different now, not dramatically, but the car pulled slightly harder from stops. The idle seemed to have settled into a smoother rhythm, the kind of change you feel in your hands on the steering wheel more than you see on a gauge. The third treated tank, 29.2 MPG, he sat at the gas pump with his calculator and his notebook and stared at the number. A 5.1 mile per gallon improvement over his baseline. He'd round it to 5.2 when accounting for the fractional differences across his baseline measurements. A 21.6% improvement in fuel economy on a car with 142,000 miles for a total vinegar expenditure of $140. The $450 professional service he'd been quoted would have produced similar results. He knew that because he'd performed that service hundreds of times. He knew what it did and how well it worked. And now he knew that 3 tanks of grocery store vinegar had done essentially the same thing. What the numbers mean. Let's put his results in practical terms, because percentage improvements are abstract and dollars are not. At 24.1 MPG, driving the American average of 13,500 miles per year with gas at $3.50 per gallon, his annual fuel cost was approximately $1,960. At 29.2 MPG, that same driving drops to approximately $1,117. That's $343 per year in fuel savings, from a $1.40 treatment repeated 3 times. $420 total. The return on investment isn't a percentage worth calculating. It's closer to a rounding error that pays for itself in the first week. And the $450 professional cleaning he skipped. That savings alone, combined with the fuel economy improvement, puts over $790 back in his pocket in year 1. The fine print, because honesty outlasts hype, this is where we pump the brakes. Because responsible information means telling you what this won't do with the same energy we used to tell you what it will. The sweet spot is high mileage engines. The Albuquerque Camry had 142,000 miles of carbon accumulation working against it. That's a thick, mature layer of deposits with plenty of material for the acetic acid to work on. Engines with over 75,000 miles, particularly those that have never had a fuel system cleaning, are where this treatment produces the most dramatic, measurable results. The more carbon there is, the more there is to remove, and the bigger the difference you'll feel. If your car has 20,000 miles on it, there simply isn't enough buildup to dissolve. You might see a marginal improvement. You might see nothing at all. The vinegar isn't failing. There's just not enough of the problem present for the solution to demonstrate itself. This is chemistry, not mechanical repair. Acetic acid dissolves carbon deposits, period. It does not resurface worn cylinder walls. It does not restore compression lost to worn piston rings. It does not fix valve seals that have hardened and cracked with age. It does not repair a timing chain that is stretched beyond specification. If your engine burns oil, misfires under load, or has a mechanical knock, carbon cleaning, whether with vinegar or a $30 branded product or an $800 professional service, will not solve the underlying problem. Those are mechanical failures that require mechanical repair. Expecting a chemical treatment to fix physical wear is like expecting soap to fix a cracked pipe. It's the wrong tool for the wrong problem. Direct injection engines benefit most, but carry a caveat. GDI, gasoline direct injection, engines are especially prone to intake valve carbon buildup because fuel is injected directly into the combustion chamber, bypassing the intake valves entirely. No fuel washing over the valves means no detergent action to keep them clean. These engines accumulate carbon on the valve backsides faster than any other design, and the vacuum line method is particularly effective at addressing this specific buildup, since it introduces the acetic acid directly into the intake tract, where it contacts the valve surfaces. However, engines with extreme GDI carbon buildup, the kind where chunks of hardened carbon can physically obstruct valve movement, may need professional walnut shell blasting as a first step. Vinegar works on deposits that are still bonded to the surface. If the buildup is so severe that pieces are breaking off on their own, you need a mechanic before you need a kitchen cabinet. Results vary because engines vary. The Albuquerque Camry's 5.2 MPG improvement is a real documented result from a real vehicle. It is not a guarantee that your specific engine will produce identical numbers. Variables matter: baseline condition, mileage, driving habits, fuel quality, engine design, ambient temperature, and whether the engine has been maintained or neglected. Some drivers report improvements of 2 to 3 MPG. Others report smoother idle and better throttle response without a measurable fuel economy change. The chemistry is consistent. The starting conditions aren't. The distance between two counters. Here's the final image, and it's the one worth keeping. There are two counters in this story. One is at the auto parts store, brightly lit, stocked with rows of branded fuel additives and bottles designed to look like they belong in a laboratory, priced to suggest that the solution to your engine's carbon problem is specialized, proprietary, and worth $25 to $35 every few thousand miles. Behind that counter is an $18.4 billion industry that depends on you believing the answer is complicated. The other counter is in your kitchen. On it sits a jug of white distilled vinegar that cost less than a cup of coffee. Inside that jug is the same class of molecule, the same organic acid, the same dissolution chemistry, the same reaction mechanism that professional services and premium additives use to clean your engine. The difference isn't the chemistry, it's the markup. The distance between those two counters is about 30 feet in most homes, but in terms of what the automotive maintenance industry wants you to know, it might as well be 30 miles. You've now crossed it. You understand the problem? Carbon buildup silently stealing your engine's power, efficiency, and responsiveness. You understand the history. 5,000 years of civilizations arriving at the same chemical solution. You understand the industry. Billions of dollars in revenue built on keeping that solution in a premium bottle with a premium price. You understand the chemistry. Acetic acid breaking carbon bonds at the molecular level. And you understand the method. Two simple approaches, one targeted and one effortless, both effective. The jug is in your kitchen. Your car is in your driveway. The chemistry is 5,000 years old and confirmed by the Smithsonian, the U.S. military, and NASA. The only thing left is the 20 steps between your kitchen counter and your car. Take them.